And without further ado, I'll pass it over to our speaker, Danae Shell.
Thank you so much, Brittany, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm so delighted to speak with you. As Brittany said, Kate and I started Valla and got into employment law not as lawyers, we are technologists. And the reason that I have taken such an interest in this enough to build a company is that I was so frustrated that so many people weren't able to use their rights. And I love opportunities like this where I get to share all of this stuff that I've learned with people who might not know it, might not know how much power they have, might not know how many options that they have. So thank you for coming. So what I'm going to do is today we're going to talk you through just a few sections. First, I'm going to start off with talking you through some rights that you may not know that you actually have. And then we're going to actually look at some specific examples of that with a little quiz. It's a quiz that I wish didn't exist, but I think it will be helpful. We're going to guess whether or not a situation is toxic or illegal, or they can easily be both. And then I'm going to talk you through, okay, if something is illegal or if it isn't, what can you do when bad things happen? Like, what options do you actually have? And I'm going to talk to you a lot there about this concept of leverage and how I think it's so important and people just don't know enough about it. And finally, Britt is then going to talk you through all of those amazing organizations that are participating and more organizations, again, who can help you specific to your situation or someone that you know who's going through a difficult situation. Now, one thing I will warn you is in order to help you understand your rights, we have to talk about some distressing stuff. So I will be discussing during the quiz section specific incidents of things like bullying, racism, and sexism. So feel free to mute and at that part if you don't think that's going to be very good for you today. You can always jump back on when we get to the section about the options. All right, so let's kick off with this idea of rights that you didn't know that you had. Now, like I said, I was new to the employment world a couple of years ago, and I think I shared a conception that a lot of people have, which is this idea that until you've worked at a company for 2 years, you don't really have any rights. I think I've heard that a lot from people saying, well, basically an employer can get away with whatever they want until you've been there for 2 years. And there are some rights that only kick in after 2 years. So for example, after 2 years of working at a company, you have the right against unfair dismissal and constructive dismissal, which is when the employer doesn't outright dismiss you, but they make it so impossible for you to work there that you feel as if you have to resign. You have the right to being paid for redundancy, and you have the right to actually request a reason why you were dismissed. So those are some of the important rights that you do have after 2 years of service. But, and this is the thing that I think a lot of people don't know or don't know a lot about, you still have rights from day one. And in fact, these are called day one rights. And this is not the full list. This is just a sampling of some of the ones that I think are really important that people know that they have. So from day one, you have rights in health and safety. You have rights against being discriminated against. And you also have rights against what's called automatic unfair dismissal, which is being dismissed because of discrimination. You also have the right to request flexible working. And from day one, your employer has to go through formal processes that ACAS set out. ACAS is an organization helping people resolve situations with their employers. And they've set out a legal code of practice that employers have to follow when it comes to dealing with a grievance, if you raise a complaint, or if they are disciplining someone through a disciplinary process. So those are so important. And if you do want to know more about these day one rights, we have a free guide called an action toolkit. Brittany will tell you a little bit more about it later on. That goes through a lot more day one rights that you have. But what I want to do today for this session is I really want to dig in on those rights against discrimination and automatic unfair dismissal. Because I think when we hear the term discrimination, I think we all have an idea in our head of what that might be. It's probably something really horrible and straightforward, like someone using a slur against someone or saying that they don't want to hire them because maybe they're pregnant or something like that. So let's zoom in on that, because it's not quite as straightforward as you think it might be. So let's dig in on what I mean when I say discrimination, because I think that there is a lot more rights that people have that they don't realize that they have. So at a high level, discrimination is unfair treatment because of one of these 9 protected characteristics. That's what they're called in the law, protected characteristics. So people can't be treated unfairly at work because they are disabled, because they have a particular race or ethnicity, because of their sex or gender, etc., etc. And I think we all roughly know about this, right? We've kind of got this concept in our head of, you're not allowed to be treated unfairly because you belong to one of these characteristics or multiple characteristics along these lines. But this is where I think it gets a little bit more nuanced, and I think people don't really have a lot of context around what discrimination can actually mean. And I wish I could tell this to everyone in the UK, because I think it's so important. So there are actually 6 different types of discrimination. Now, the one that we all think of, I think when we think about discrimination, that slur or someone being told that they can't have a job because they got pregnant or something like that, that's called direct discrimination. And that is by far, I think, the one that is most well understood. And people know that, something's gone wrong if someone comes out and says, oh, I don't like that person because of their religion or something like that. But that's only 1/6 of the different types of discrimination out there. And what I want to do just for a minute is to talk you through those other ones, because I want to give you a sampling. I want to give you just a little bit more context about what these other ones can look like, so that you can then start to recognize, wait, that sounds familiar. And then you know what to Google if something like this goes wrong. So first, I want to tell you about indirect discrimination. So if direct discrimination is someone actively unfairly treating someone else, indirect discrimination is when a company policy or a company practice doesn't just affect one person, but it affects a whole group of people with the same protected characteristic. So for example, if a dress code bans turbans, then that doesn't just affect one person, it affects a whole group of people who are Sikh, who wear turbans. Or similarly, if that dress code said you're not allowed to have afros as part of the dress code, or twist outs or locks, then that is indirectly discriminating against all kinds of Black people who wear their hair naturally. So it doesn't have to be a one-to-one situation to be discriminatory. We helped someone at Valla who had an issue where the company said, we don't do job shares. We just don't do them. We're not allowed to do them. We're not going to do them. And the thing is, job shares affect women more, and especially returning mothers more than other genders or anyone else. So that person had a really good case to say, actually, I think you're indirectly discriminating against all women in your company, because you're saying no job shares are available, that flexible working option isn't available. So that's indirect discrimination. Now, harassment, I think we all know about one type of harassment, unfortunately, the kind of harassment that many of us have faced at work, which is sexual harassment or some kind of harassing behavior towards someone, verbal harassment or something like that. There is another type of harassment that I think it's really important that people know about. So harassment discrimination doesn't just apply when someone is harassing someone else who has that protected characteristic, but if you, as a bystander at that job, are seeing someone else being harassed over and over, that's creating what's called an offensive environment. And that means that you too are being harassed, and you have rights to speak up against that. You have the right to say, look, I'm being harassed and that's not okay. So allies are essentially protected under discrimination law to be able to speak up and say, look, this is creating a terrible environment, not just for the person being directly harassed, but also for me. And I think not enough people know about that. I certainly wish I had known about that in the past. So that's something I just wanted to plant in your mind so that you know a little bit more about it. And another one that I think is so important and not a lot of people know about is this right to raise an issue and not be punished for it. That's called victimization. So if someone says, even verbally, just casually to their boss, hey, you know what, I don't think that we're treating women well here, or I think we might have a race problem, or are we always demoting people who come back from maternity leave? If they raise an issue like that, verbally, written, however they do it, and then they're treated unfairly because they raised that issue, maybe they were called a troublemaker, maybe they were labeled not a team player. I've seen and heard all of those situations. If that happens, if say your performance reviews suddenly go down, or they stop inviting you to client meetings or things like that, that's called victimization. And it is a type of discrimination that is protected for employees. So often at Valla, what we see is someone who dealt with some kind of direct, indirect, or harassment type of discrimination, who spoke up about it, and then were further victimized by their employers rather than the employers actually resolving it and dealing with it. And all of that is illegal. There's two different kinds of illegal going on there. There's two different potential claims if they were to take that forward. Now, the final two types of discrimination are specifically for disabled people. Now, the first one is a failure to make reasonable adjustments. Now, if a disabled person comes to their employer and says, look, I have this disability and it would be really helpful if you could do X, the employer has to take that seriously. So take, for example, someone who is autistic and they really struggle in those big open plan offices and they want to be able to wear their headphones while they're working. Again, this is a real situation that I've seen, and the employer said, oh no, it's not allowed, it's not collaborative, or it looks bad, or something like that. That person can say, well, you're actually failing to make a reasonable adjustment for my disability. I can still perform my work with headphones on. I don't have to have my headphones off all the time. And that, again, is a type of discrimination. And finally, there is also discrimination arising from a disability. So disabled people aren't just protected for the specifics of their disability, but also for, the big aura effect that their disability has on the rest of their lives. So say, for example, someone has chronic back pain and they're a carer. And that means because of their chronic back pain that they can't easily ride a bus. It just exacerbates their back pain terribly. They aren't being discriminated, and then the company says, oh, you have to ride a bus to work, you're not allowed to drive, or we can't make alternative accommodations. They're not being disabled, they're not being discriminated against because they have a disability, they're being discriminated against because they can't ride a bus. And so they're even protected for those knock-on effects of their disability. So I'm going to pause for a second. That was a lot to give you there. And what I just gave you was like a little sampling. I just wanted to put a little bit of color on some of these different types of discrimination, because in my experience, when I talk to people, they don't know about this. They don't know that these rights are available to them. And I just wish I could tell everyone about it. And in fact, we created a whole training course to try and tell everyone about it. It's called Discrimination First Aid. And what we're trying to do is help train people to be better allies at work, to learn about all these different types of discrimination, and then to be able to support people who are going through that problem at work. So if you're interested, you can check out Discrimination First Aid. But the goal of this session today is to just give you enough of an idea so that you can Google it later on, so that you've got a better understanding of what rights are available to you. And now what I want to do is I want to just solidify that a little bit more, and I want to go through a couple of different scenarios. So I wish, like I said, I wish this quiz didn't exist, but I think this is going to be a really useful way to help you understand whether or not something is illegal or whether it's toxic. And toxic is bad enough, but let's talk about whether it's illegal as well. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to read you a scenario. Please have your fingers at the ready on the comments section in Zoom. So I'm going to read out this scenario, and I would like you to just vote, just type in the comments section in Zoom whether you think that this scenario is toxic or illegal. And you can also vote both. Okay, so our first scenario, we're going to go through 4. Our first scenario is that a woman who is Black and Muslim, she saw that her boss was making racist comments on Facebook, and she made a complaint about it at work. And in response, HR did do a little bit. They moved her over into a different team, but they didn't discipline the boss in any way. And this really affected this woman. And she was crying. She was unable to return to work the next day, and she felt really isolated from her team. So I see the answers coming in already. So I've got lots of illegals. Ooh, someone has said illegal harassment, just adding on that extra layer. Excellent. Lots of people voting toxic and illegal. Absolutely. Excellent. Yes, and toxic. I agree, Olivia. Definitely toxic. Okay, let's have a look at this one. So yes, this was illegal. So this was found to be not just race discrimination, but also religious discrimination because of the color of those racist comments and how HR handled it. And there's something here that I really want to point out to you. So not only was this illegal, and there's maybe she had to leave and she needed compensation for her salary or something like that, but she also got an award from the tribunal for something called injury to feelings. And this is something, again, that I just wish I could tell everyone about, because I don't know about you, but when I've gone through terrible situations at work, they have physically and emotionally affected me so much. I have felt like I was going to vomit before I came into the office. I have not been able to sleep. I have had to go to the doctor and, get prescribed medicine for depression. Kate and I, we started this company because we went through similar situations like this ourselves. And those feelings, I think we're taught, especially as women, we're taught to just minimize them. We're taught to just put up with it. And we're taught that they don't matter. And that's not true. So in a case where discrimination has happened at work, the impact of that discrimination on a person's feelings is directly codified into a compensation called injury to feelings. And that number can go anywhere from about £900 to £45,000, depending upon the severity of the impact it had on that person. So let's look at this case again. This woman was upset, crying, unable to come in the next day, felt isolated. Now, I don't know about you, but I've gone through a lot of those situations in the past, obviously not in this context, but I just thought I had to get on with it. And so that's why I'm pointing out this idea of injury to feelings, because our feelings do matter. They matter to the tribunal. The impact that this discrimination has on people matters enough that somebody has taken the trouble to put a pound amount against it. So that's, by the by, I just wanted to make sure that we all understand that, because I think we can feel so isolated and alone when these things are happening to us. So that's really what I wanted to get across. Your feelings really do matter. Okay, let's do our second scenario. Thank you for your question, Rosie, but I'll pick that up at the end. So our second scenario is an experienced female economist applies to get a promotion. And the panel who assesses those promotions, they know about her gender. It's not a gender blind situation, and it's not a gender balance panel. And lo and behold, the employees that do get promoted are all men with much less experience, but she is passed over for promotion. Is it toxic or illegal? Let's vote in the comments. Much more mixed on this one. Super interesting. A couple of toxics, more illegals coming in. Cool. So some people thinking it's illegal, some people thinking it's toxic. Let's have a look at this. So it was illegal. And I think this one surprised me when I first looked at it, because this is such a common situation. I had no idea that it could be illegal. But what the tribunal found in this real life situation is that because the promotion system was so ad hoc, because they hadn't really properly followed a process where they didn't consider gender or things like that, this was counted as sex discrimination. Now, again, this depends on the specifics of this case, but what I really want to get home here is this is a situation that a lot of us have encountered ourselves. And depending on the specifics, that's illegal. Like, that's something that you can fight back against. And again, I didn't get into the details of how this impacted on this particular person, but it was bad enough that the tribunal went far above the minimum award of £900 and actually awarded £19,000 for injury to feeling to the person in this particular scenario. So again, things that we describe as only toxic can be illegal, and our feelings really do matter. Okay, let's look at 2 more scenarios. So this one is, let's imagine that a white man is sitting next to a black colleague, and he notices that her boss will just not leave her alone about her hair. He keeps telling her to cover it up, to cut it, to straighten it, and he just will not he will not leave her alone about her hair. Now, he has raised this issue, the man has raised this issue to HR, but they've done nothing to stop the manager. Do we think that that's toxic or illegal? Lots of illegals coming in on this one, lots of toxic and illegals. Absolutely. And does somebody want to pop into the comments why it's illegal, why they think it's illegal? Illegal harassment? Absolutely. Yeah, because of race and harassment. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's actually, yeah, and HR have done nothing. Exactly. So there's 2 different things going on here. So the black woman who's getting harassed by her manager could easily talk about race discrimination, race harassment. Absolutely. But remember that other type of harassment I was telling you about. Exactly, Kirsten, the offensive environment. So not only that, but the man himself, despite not having a protected characteristic, he could still talk to that employer and say, look, I think you are creating an offensive environment. And if I wanted to take this forward, I think I have a potential claim at tribunal. You need to sort this out. All right, last scenario. Let's look at this one. A person at work, she seems to just hate her colleague and she refuses to look her in the eye or address her directly. And the rest of the team, they have no idea why this is happening and nobody wants to deal with it. They don't even want to take it to HR. Now, is that toxic or is it illegal? Lots of toxics, lots and lots of toxics. You are a great group. Oh, great question, Valina. I'm going to come back to that. And the question was, what does it cost to take a case to court? Absolutely. So you are absolutely right. This one is toxic. And I think you've all picked up on the key difference here. It's because a protected characteristic wasn't involved. And because a protected characteristic wasn't involved, this then wouldn't count as one of those discrimination types. So this is an example of, if someone had created a toxic environment that made it impossible for someone to continue working there and the company didn't do anything about it, that's where that 2-year thing would kick in and they might potentially have a constructive dismissal claim that they could pursue with their employer. Okay, so I've got a couple of questions coming in. I'm just going to come back to those towards the end because I'm definitely going to answer one in just a second. Because now I'm going to move on to, okay, we've learned that maybe some things are illegal that we didn't know were illegal, or we've gotten some more context about what discrimination can really mean at work. So what can you actually do about this? Just like the question, what does it cost to take to court? It's so intimidating. The idea of doing anything about this is so intimidating, right? So what can you do about it if something bad has happened at work? So to answer that question, I want to talk about this idea of leverage. And this is probably the thing I get most excited about when I talk to people who don't really know what their options are. I want to say to everyone, there are opportunities for massive amounts of leverage with your employer where you can really push them to get what you want done, where you can get an issue resolved. And the main time that you have the most leverage as an employee is within the specific 3-month window after something bad has happened. So let me explain that. So after something bad has happened, you have a 3-month window where you have the right to potentially take that claim to tribunal. So let's use an example. So let's say Bianca, she was dismissed on the 1st of May, and she believes that that was down to a discriminatory reason. So in order for her to take that to tribunal, she would need to take action, take the next step by the 31st of July. From the 1st of May to the 31st of July, Bianca has the most power in that situation that she will have. And here's why. Because even if Bianca knows that she doesn't want to go to tribunal, she still has leverage with her employer during that time, because employers do not want to go to tribunal. Categorically speaking, employers are not a fan of going to tribunal. And that's for a few different reasons. One, it costs them a lot of money. So employers almost always use a lawyer when they're going into a tribunal, and that costs a lot of money. So minimum, we're looking at about maybe £8,000 for a simple case. And that can go into the tens and sometimes even the hundreds of thousands of pounds, which many employers just can't afford or don't want to afford. It also takes up a lot of staff time. There's a lot of going through documents, looking up emails, all kinds of stuff. Takes a lot of time, and employers don't want to have to do that. And finally, it also is a big reputational risk for employers, because all of the tribunal transcripts, all of the judgments and tribunals, they're all public. So if a case goes through, then all of the details about the wrongdoings of that employer are out there on Google against their name. And a lot of employers absolutely do not want that reputational risk out there in the public domain. On the other hand, you don't have to go to tribunal, but you absolutely could go to tribunal. So one thing I think a lot of people don't know is that the way that the employment tribunal was set up, it's set up so that the employee does not have to have a lawyer. The courts, the judges, everyone in the staff, they are trained to be able to support people who don't understand the tribunal system. They're not lawyers. They don't know all the legalese. I mean, yeah, they are overwhelmed at the best of times, but this was set up in a way that means that you are not supposed to have a lawyer. You don't have to go through the huge expense if you can't afford to do that. And it's also free. It doesn't cost any money to file a tribunal claim. And you can also withdraw your tribunal claim at any time. So say, for example, we see a lot of cases in the public record where someone has made a claim and then they later withdraw it because they and their employer settle. Sometimes the employer settles the morning of the first hearing because they're like, I don't want any of this dirty laundry out in public. It's still not that easy to go all the way through the tribunal process. So that's why Valla exists. That's one of the first things that Kate and I built, was the ability for people to manage this stuff on their own, because we strongly believe that people should be able to do this on their own. And it's not just Valla. There are so many other organizations that help people through this process. So if they don't want to go to tribunal, nobody wants to go to tribunal, but you could. That gives you a lot of leverage during that 3-month period. And then you can use that leverage to resolve your issue. And using that leverage is 3 straightforward steps. Step 1, show that you know what your rights are. That's why the beginning of this talk, I talked you through some stuff you might not have known about. So show your employer that you know what your rights are. Show them that you could go to tribunal, and then follow the process by the book. So let me talk about what I mean when I say the process. So if something has gone bad at work and you want your employer to make it right, maybe you would like a settlement because you've left. Maybe you would like the promotion that you were denied to be reconsidered, whatever it is. The first step is always to document everything that's gone on. And when I say document everything, what I mean, for example, is if you were in a meeting and it was just a verbal meeting, nothing was recorded, as soon as you step out of that meeting, sit down and take notes of everything that you remember. That's absolutely fine. It doesn't have to be a recording. It can just be your own recall of that situation. If there's a bunch of text messages or emails or something like that going around, keep track of them. And this is why this is the first thing that we built at Valla, is a free evidence collection functionality where you can just forward in emails to keep track of everything, keep it all tidy and in order. And then once you kind of got everything together, always use the internal processes first before you start thinking about any potential legal option. And that's for two different reasons. One is your employer has to follow them. Like I said, ACAS has a code of practice that employers must follow when there's a grievance or anything like that. But also what you're signaling to your employer is, look, I know this game. I know that if I went to tribunal later on, the first question that they're going to ask is, did you exhaust all of the internal options? So here I am exhausting all of the internal options. Again, you never have to actually go to tribunal. You just have to signal that you know the game and you're following the playbook. If all of that falls apart, if your grievance is denied, if the appeal falls apart, then you can escalate the issue to ACAS. Now, remember, I said ACAS exists as an organization to help employees and employers resolve issues together. They have a fantastic helpline. It's in our resource guide. And they also have a free conciliation service where someone acts as a mediator between you and your employer to try and resolve the issue. And so a lot of things get resolved there. And you can even organize a settlement through ACAS if you want that, if that's the thing that you're looking for. You don't have to use ACAS. You can also negotiate a settlement separately using something called a without prejudice letter. And then only once you've exhausted all of those different options, then you can go to, okay, I guess I need to start the tribunal process. Again, we see a lot of people who start the tribunal process while they're still negotiating with their employer to ramp up the pressure. And all of that involves is going through ACAS conciliation. Once the conciliation is finished, if the issue still isn't resolved, ACAS gives you all the details that you need to make a tribunal claim. So if I was to summarize that into almost like a menu of your options if something terrible goes wrong at work, this is how I would summarize that. And I'll throw in one extra option that you have as well. So one option that you have is to use all of your internal processes. Like I said, this is always the first option that I would take. Look at your employee handbook. And if they don't have a handbook, look at the ACAS code of practice. And that will tell you exactly how to raise a grievance. We have a grievance template on our website as well. So yeah, use internal processes first. If you want to settle, you have two options. You can go through ACAS, or you can use a without prejudice letter, which is basically a letter that says, hi, this is off the record. I think this has happened to me. You don't seem to be willing to make it right, so I would like this much in compensation. You also have the right to something that I think nobody knows about, and I think it's so powerful. So you might have heard of a data subject access request in the past, maybe in relation to the GDPR. What this is you have the ability as a citizen to ask any company for the data that they hold about you, including your employer. And the data that they hold about you is any time that you are personally identified. So you can ask, for example, for all of the emails, meeting notes, text messages, Slack messages, whatever, relating to you and your performance, or you and a particular incident. And you don't have to have been party to those conversations. They are just conversations about you that were out there. And your employer has to give you that information. It's your legal right to request that information. And so we've built a free DSAR letter generator so that you can request that information, because it's so powerful to help people collect evidence if they think that something dodgy has gone on in the background. And we've seen people effectively use that to then collect information and then get a settlement with their employer. You can use ACAS conciliation, use that free mediator to help you resolve that issue. And then ACAS conciliation is also the way that you start the tribunal process if you want to go that way. And then the last thing I think is so important is you can also just choose to do nothing. You can choose to leave because it's not worth it. That is an absolutely valid thing to do. You don't have to stay and fight. Like, that is a perfectly valid choice. You can protect yourself, protect your mental health by going. The other thing that I don't see a lot of people doing, and I think is such a great option, is you can also decide to take some sick leave to build your strength, to figure out what you want to do next, to not have to make hasty decisions. I'm often telling people, think about sick leave before you make any big decisions. Just give yourself a little bit of breathing room, because I think it's such an important thing to do for yourself. Whether you still decide to go, it doesn't matter. Just look after yourself. So what we have done there is we have started with talking you through some rights that you may not have known that you had, then putting a little bit of color on those rights to help you hopefully recognize some situations you might have seen before and understand that they could have been illegal and there could be some recourse that you could have as a result of that. Then I've tried to give you a sampling of the different options that you could take and talk to you about that leverage, that power that you might not have known that you had, so that you then know that you can take action. You do have options, even if you decide that you don't want to do any of that at all. And now as this final step, before we get to the questions, the last thing that Britt and I really want you to understand is that you're absolutely not alone in this. And so what Britt's going to do is she's going to talk you through this resource guide that we've prepared for you to help you get that support that you need if you're going through a difficult situation. Okay, I will hand over to Britt.
Thank you so much, Danae. I am going to put a link in the chat so that everyone can follow along with me and put in your own options, as you'll see. I'll explain in just a moment. So if you all go to that link, you should see this resource guide here. So what we've made is a very simple way to contextualize and make more accessible all of the different support organizations, helplines, different women's organizations, charities. And that's why we had so many of the logos and the people that we reached out to help with this particular workshop and resource guide, is that we understand that it can feel very overwhelming when you're in the middle of this, you're having anxiety or whatever because of what's happening at work. And then you have to then wade through all of the different people who are trying to help you, but you can't quite digest what's going on. So we've made it to where you can answer just a couple of questions or just complete some sentences that will help point you into the right direction for different organizations and helplines that can be of use in your situation. So let's walk through just two scenarios together. The first one we're going to do is to say, you're just going to complete the sentence. So you say, I think I am being discriminated against or harassed at work. You can also have the option if someone you know might be being discriminated against or harassed at work, and you can do this workflow many times so you can explore the different outcomes. So let's say you think you are being discriminated against or harassed at work. You're employed in, you can choose England, Scotland, or Wales. So let's say you're employed in England. Let's say your first name is Danae. Let's use Danae as an example. So Danae thinks that she's being discriminated against or harassed based on, and then as Danae mentioned earlier, there's all of the different protected characteristics. So we have them listed here. So you can choose which one is most applicable to your situation. And then there's a different outcome for each one. So for example, let's do pregnancy and maternity. So it will confirm your choice. And then it takes about 10 seconds for the guide to load, and it gives you an option to change your answers before it shows. So let's put in our email address. If you want to be given more information in the future, you can say yes, and then click continue. As I said, you can change your answers. If you're like, oh, actually, I want to see what happens when I choose this other thing, that's fine. You can either go back or edit your answer here. And then you say continue. And then, like I said, it just takes a few seconds to generate your guide. So at the end here, you'll see that you have the option to, you should see your name and today's date here in this section. You can also book a time with a member of the team here at Valla. You can also get the action toolkit for free that Danae mentioned here. And then what's specifically for you is going to be here, but I just wanted to flag really quick that you could also email this to yourself so you have it in your email inbox, or you can, if you chose friend, for example, and you wanted to email them the guide, you can put their email address here and send it to them. Or you can download as a zip, but let's just go here for now. So what happens here is you're going to see, you should be able to see, I'm just going to move the Zoom thing for a second. So we should be able to download this and save it to your computer. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to download, save, and we can see that we have Danae's situation here where she thinks that she's being discriminated against or harassed based on pregnancy and maternity. So we have a couple of things. As I said, it can be very overwhelming because there's so much stuff to do. So instead of just wading through all of this first, we just said, okay, just do these 3 things first. If you only have capacity to do 1, do this first. If you only have capacity to do 2 things, do these 2, and so on. But then the rest of it is categorized by different stages. So maybe you're just trying to figure out, what are my rights when I'm returning to work after maternity leave, for example. There's an article that will take you to say, here are your rights after you're returning to work after maternity leave, for example. What to do in the first 24 hours after you've lost your job. Different things that if you're just trying to understand some of your rights a little bit more, you can go into this learn section. If you're in the section where you're a bit more ready to take action, things have gotten a little bit farther. There's different things you can do, like the action toolkit, the platform that Danae mentioned. We have stuff in our help center, things like that. How you can get help, how you can protect others. One of the things I wanted to flag here is the partner that we're working with on Speak Out Revolution. So what they're doing is to help bring visibility to the issue of discrimination and harassment at work. So what they've done is they've created a survey where you can see the different, so if you look here, you'll see like an example of what the dashboard looks like, and you can add yours into this so that we can create more ability to create visibility around these issues and a campaign for change in the UK and globally. So that's one option as well. Danae also mentioned ACAS. So we have the links. All of these headers are linked to the different organizations, and it has the numbers and a little description. So this is a large part of this is thank you to Fawcett Society, who helped with this section as well. And so what I wanted to flag here is the fact that there's, when you go to like TUC, for example, which is the Trade Unions Congress, you'll have your section like based on your location, so England, Scotland, or Wales. And then I just wanted to flag a few things in that. What we wanted to do with this is create a more holistic approach to helping you, which is the sense of, we understand like if you're in this situation, not only are you worried about your legal rights at work, but you're also worried about your mental health, your physical health, your rights in the hospital, things like that. So one of the people that, one of the organizations and charities that we talked to is Birthrights. And what they do is they focus on your rights in the hospital and around your respect as a human who is someone who's giving birth. Also, Pregnant Then Screwed has a mentoring system, a mentoring scheme, and a helpline. So different organizations. One of the things as well is that the Fawcett Society has this great resource list where it can focus on your mental health. So things like Mind, Samaritans, things like that. So what we wanted to show you and do with this particular guide is really give you not just here's all the legal stuff, but also here's how to take care of people who can help you for when you're dealing with the mental health aspects of this and the trauma that's happening to you right now, or your physical health, or you just need a friend or a mentor to help you walk through this when they've been through this before. Like Working Families, for example, which gives information for working parents and carers, things like that. So we wanted to just highlight these different organizations that are there to help you in your particular situation. So I've spent a little bit of time on that, but what I wanted to do next is just do one more quick walkthrough to show you how it's different in a different jurisdiction. So let's go back and change our answer to something different. So let's say I'm being discriminated against or harassed at work in Scotland, and my first name is Brittany. And let's say I'm being discriminated against or harassed, I think maybe based on sex. Maybe I am a woman in STEM and let's in science, engineering, and math, for example. And I feel like I'm getting paid less than my male colleagues, for example. So in that scenario, let's see what my resource guide would say. So I'm not going to download it just because we just to give some more time for questions. But what you'll see is we're in this section, we have that same kind of layout of things, 3 things to do first: learn, take action, get help, help protect others. And then if we go to this other organizations and helplines that may be useful in your situation, you'll notice that there's different answers now, because some of these are only based in Scotland. So like Just Right Scotland, for example, has a Just Law Center that will help you with your legal rights. Equate Scotland, like I said, if I was a woman in STEM who feels I'm being discriminated against based on my gender and being paid less than someone else, then maybe Equate Scotland might be able to help me with their different conferences and resources, help me with mentorship and career advice. And then the Fawcett Society also offers an equal pay advice service. So if you make £30,000 or less, then you can talk to a solicitor from Lee Day. So they have a partnership there. So you just have to fill out this questionnaire, and then they'll be able to kind of help you with that. So that's just to show you some of the different outcomes that can happen when you run through the different guides. So hopefully you've been able to have a chance to run through that. If you haven't yet, we can send you some links afterwards as well. So I wanted to give you some time for questions because there were a couple of questions in the chat. So Danae, do you want to speak to those?
Absolutely, yes. And please feel free to fire any other questions in the chat, or feel free to come off of mute and just ask a question live. That's no problem. So Rosie had a question: because the comments were made on social media and not in the workplace, does that make a difference to the rights she's allowed? That's a great question. I think in this particular case, the case pivoted on what the employers chose to do and not do about it afterwards. I'd need to check about I still think that something that was directed at her outside of the workplace still could count. That's one thing about the Equality Act that we have talked about, those 9 protected characteristics. Those protected characteristics protect someone even outside of the workplace. What we focused on today is the protections inside the workplace, but you have protections against being harassed in other contexts as well. So I don't know about the social media aspect of it in particular, but I think that the reason that it was illegal in that case was because of how the company then chose to handle it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rosie. We had a question, I'm just scrolling through. One of the questions was definitely, what does it cost to take a case to court? It's very intimidating. I completely agree. If someone was hiring a lawyer to represent them, you're looking at a cost of, at minimum, £5,000–6,000. It could easily go into the tens of thousands of pounds, which is why, well, I don't know about you, but I can't afford that. So that's why we created Valla, because we understood that the employment tribunals were supposed to be created for people to do them for free without a lawyer. And we decided to build a platform that would help people actually achieve that. So the cost on our platform is more in the hundreds of pounds if you went all the way through. Individual documents that you might need to generate are as cheap as £7.99, up to the more complex documents that are maybe £70 or something like that. So yeah, it really depends. It's still a difficult, time-consuming process. I'm not encouraging everyone to jump into tribunal. Remember that key leverage is that you could go, and you've got that 3-month window to show your employer that you know that you could go and that they want to avoid it, so they should probably resolve that issue with you. What happens if the company do a payout and non-disclosure agreement on a sex discrimination case? What happens? So Deo, let me know if there's any part of this that I get wrong, but they can absolutely ask. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask about this happened to somebody I know. So they got harassed at work, but they had to leave because it was too much and it was affecting their mental health and everything. And they kind of got I don't know whether I've used the right word, where they pay the money and they're not allowed to speak to anyone about it. What's the legal name for it? Is it non-disclosure or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were given them a big amount of money and told not to talk about it, even though they felt they should really talk about it because somebody else could go in and then something else happens. So what's the legal right on that?
Yeah, so they employers can ask for a non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality agreement
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
exchange for settlement.
Mhm.
It's up to the person to I think this it's been a big problem as people felt they were pressured to say yes to that. And actually the Law Society of England and Wales has issued a new guidance to lawyers who are supporting these employers and supporting employees, saying non-disclosure agreements shouldn't be used to cover up criminal behavior. And so you don't have to say yes if the employer asks for a non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality agreement. It might mean that they choose not to settle, but keep in mind that the alternative is going public with tribunal, which is even more public than trying to gag a particular person. There's also
Yeah, that's what happened. They said to take the money so that they don't go public. That's exactly what happened, because it's quite a big company. But the person involved said, "Oh, sometimes I just feel I shouldn't even take the money, but I've had to leave and I haven't got a choice, and I'm so stressed up, and they've taken time off work, and it's been ongoing like for a long time, in and out of sick leave, sick notes and stuff, and kind of exhausted. Didn't even get to tribunal before they settled out of I don't know what it is. They settled out with a big amount, a huge amount of money, tax-free as well."
Good. Yeah, a settlement is a great outcome for a lot of people. A lot of people, that's what they're looking for. They just want to get, be able to cover their losses until they find a new job, and that, just be done with it. But there's nothing illegal about asking someone to sign a confidentiality agreement. Like, that's not a problem. But I do think if someone is in that situation, I would want them to know that they have the right to push back, and they certainly don't have to say yes. And then the employer, they can negotiate on that basis.
I wish I'd known you at the time, because at the time, the person in question couldn't find anyone to sort this out. So I'd like to get involved in this, just so that this doesn't happen again. Just to help others and stuff like that. I'd love to get involved. So if
You
that's
should
something.
absolutely check out our discrimination first aid program.
Okay.
Find it for.
Yeah,
And
I'll do that. Thank you.
I will
Sorry?
add, Pregnant Then Screwed are doing a campaign against non-disclosure agreement as well. So
fantastic. Yeah, I'm part of them anyway. I'm a feminist, so that's me. Thank you very much. I won't take up any more time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I was just going to say really quickly, I'm going to put a link in the chat to the discrimination first aid training. You can look at it there. And then it looks like Charanjit, who is from the International Association for Religious Freedom. So she has her hand up. Hi, Charanjit, how are you? Do you want to say something really quick?
You're on mute.
Oh, yeah.
Hello. Yes.
Hello.
Thank you. Yeah. Hello. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. That's great. But I think the issues you have picked up are employer versus the individual employee. And there are issues in the context of when a company decides to reduce its workforce.
Yes.
And there is a whole complicated process in that, which would affect a number of people who may have all these different characteristics in different ways. So is there a group way of doing things?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. Yes, there absolutely is. So more than one person can be part of a tribunal claim, and there are claims that are involving tens or hundreds or sometimes even thousands of people. At Valla, we don't specialize in that yet, although if someone came to us and said that they wanted to do that, we would be very excited and do our best to help them with that. It's just we've started by focusing on discrimination because
yes, I can see that. But that is much more where organization of individuals is also important in that context.
Yeah, but it is a right that people have. They can absolutely do that, and we would love to help someone try and do that. Absolutely.
Okay. And how does that link in with what some of the trade unions might be doing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question as well. So we love trade unions and want people to be part of trade unions. And actually, we've talked to some trade unions and think that our platform can help them help even more people.
Mhm.
And so Valla, for people who don't have a trade union, Valla is a great kind of.
That's very good. Now, my reason for asking was that that is not the bit which has come out in your resources pack, and that may be very useful really to link in with them and get that support from them as well, because yours is a training program which is working very well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that feedback.
Thank you so much, Sharanji. And thank you all so much for your questions. Just, and out of the interest of time, we only have about 1.5 minutes left. So is that okay if I close out, Danae?
Absolutely. If someone has a question that they still want answered that we haven't had time to get to, my email address is danae@valla.uk. And if you have a particular issue, you can use the links to book a time with us as well. Thank you so much.
Yes, and I will, I'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone later on today. So just look out for that, and I'll include the link to the recording, to the resource guide, different things like that. So you can kind of watch it back if something went over a little bit too quickly. So I just want to say thank you all so much for coming, and thank you again to our partners, many of which are here. So hello and thank you, and have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much.